Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 92. He's Ross McCorkle. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Friday, Steelers Nation. No Dave Bryan today. He's out on a trip out West Coast, I believe, for the next few days. So I have a couple of other voices to hear for today and for Monday's show, although today's voice, a familiar one if you're a longtime listener and reader of the podcast and the site. It is Ross McCorkle, fresh off his trip from Mobile, Alabama. And are you going to the combine? What's the status on all that right now?
Yeah, they tend to drag their feet with approving those credentials and putting out the final schedule for all the GM and coach interviews and stuff to kick off the week. But yeah, the plan is I'm definitely going. We're just kind of waiting final word, but the trip's mostly figured out on our end with everything booked. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that trip here in a couple weeks.
Can't wait to have all you guys out there for interviews with Omar Khan. Assuming that occurs, that's usually an annual occurrence for him, speaking privately to the media and then on the podium. And then, of course, with the players themselves out at any of the combine lists just released yesterday, 329 players. I think there was something like 51 defensive linemen, just kind of shows how deep and strong that class is. Ross, to start off the show, we almost have to talk about it because it became such a dominant story, although it ultimately appears to be a story that was not true and was a story ultimately about nothing, but we have to really acknowledge it and at least talk it through. Thursday morning, early in the morning, report comes out from an individual named Brian Burr, who used to cover the NFL, now is primarily covering golf and PGA Tour, all those types of things. Sent out a tweet that certainly created a lot of buzz and stirred the pot in the Steelers and Jaguars and NFL really media that the Steelers had inquired about Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence. Now he ended up following up on that tweet with some language that would indicate Pittsburgh had an offer made or had an intention to send a first and second round pick. He ended up clarifying that was his own speculation, and all he knew is that Pittsburgh had called and asked about Lawrence's availability. That was quickly shot down by local reporters in Pittsburgh, in Jacksonville, and nationally. And so there has been no reporting to corroborate that information about Pittsburgh even calling, and a report from a Jaguars beat guy that said the Jaguars would have zero interest in trading for or trading away in considering dealing Trevor Lawrence. And so this story, listen, I don't know exactly what happened. Obviously, I'm not accusing the guy of making it up. I give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm guessing somebody told him that information, but it does not seem to be accurate. And so this seems to be much ado about nothing, but the story's still out there. I think PFT just had a video go up talking about Pittsburgh reportedly speaking to the Jaguars about Trevor Lawrence, even though this thing has been, rebutted and refuted 10 ways to Sunday. So we have to talk about it because it is the story of yesterday and still the story of today. But I want to make it clear there has been no additional reporting to verify the report. So I'll ask you your thoughts, Ross, even though the thoughts are really nothing seemed to happen.
Yeah, I guess overall, this time of year, you approach everything with caution just because everybody's kind of, it's slow. So, everybody's looking for a story. And Trevor Lawrence would certainly have been a big story. But, when you really took a step or took more than 10 seconds to think about it, the Jaguars don't even have a GM currently. So who's making this deal? There's all kinds of dead money that would have been involved for the Jags, just an unreasonable amount that wouldn't have really made sense. I think there had been talks about their new head coach. One of the big reasons he went there or wanted to go there was because of Lawrence. It's just none of it made sense right from the get-go. Would it have been interesting for the Steelers? I mean, I personally am not like super high on Lawrence in general, and whatever the initial report was of what they would have had to give up, which of course was basically just that guy guessing or whatever, I guess he said. I wouldn't have wanted to give up that much for him. I thought he had a couple of 4,000-yard seasons, 2022, 2023, but man, he's overall not been that great. I think 21 touchdowns to 14 interceptions in 2023, and he has a big problem with fumbling. He fumbles very often. So, I was skeptical from the start, and I wouldn't have been very pleased if there had been some credence to the report, but much ado about nothing.
I know Dave would have been able to provide better details about the contractual obstacles in a hypothetical trade of this magnitude, but according to Over the Cap, a trade right now would create $100 million in dead money for Jacksonville. So just a non-starter there. Also, of course, leaves them without a quarterback in a pretty weak class where, Pittsburgh's first round pick is not going to be super, super valuable at 21 overall. I mean, in theory, there's no harm in teams like Pittsburgh making calls about anybody to check in. Maybe you could argue a new regime. You check in on Lawrence just to take the temperature of how this new head coach and partial staff feels about Lawrence. Although, as you said, there is no GM in place. I think the Jaguars beat guy said there were a couple higher end executives that maybe could handle just general trade calls and decision making until the whole front office gets put into place. The Jaguars doing some quick work here to interview GMs and probably will hire somebody by early next week is my guess. But again, all of this is the underbelly of the actual real story that nothing happened. The Pittsburgh did not call. They did not inquire about Trevor Lawrence. And so their quarterback search continues elsewhere. Is that going to be Russ? Is that going to be Fields? I do get the sense that some more national types, Ross, are trending towards Pittsburgh. Their 25 quarterback is going to be somebody not on the roster right now. Albert Breer made a reference to it. Some other national guys have made references to. We think it's going to be somebody that's not Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Is that your sense, or do you think it's going to be one of the internal candidates returning to start week 1 of 2025?
I mean, when Art Rooney says, one of them's likely to come back, I tend to try and, listen to that. I do think one of them will be back. I get kind of some of the logic coming out from guys like Breer. But when you look at the market, who's really out there? Who should the Steelers go after? I mean, Stafford is the most intriguing to me, but the Rams don't seem too keen on, letting him walk. It seemed like Stafford might maybe potentially be open to getting traded if you listen to what his wife said on her podcast. And, they might be displeased with what's happening with Cooper Kupp and them trying to trade his favorite receiver. But outside of Stafford, I mean, are they going to do the same thing where they sign, Kirk Cousins for $1.21 million like they did Russell Wilson? I mean, right now the Falcons aren't even saying that they're going to get rid of Cousins. I think they ultimately will have to. You can't just have a $100 million plus quarterback as the backup looking over your second year guy's shoulders. But I'm not super intrigued by that. He didn't have a good year. He's not mobile. Aaron Rodgers, I mean, he's old. He's not mobile. The Steelers want mobility. They value mobility. I mean, I know Stafford isn't mobile either, but I think he's the best of those three in terms of the pocket passers at this point in their careers. And then you look at the next kind of crop of guys. I mean, any of the guys like, I don't know, Zach Wilson, all these, Daniel Jones, nothing really screams to me that there's a huge upgrade out there over Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. And then you listen to, kind of reports about, who was that just yesterday? Was that Pelissero saying there's not really going to be a ton of money out there for anybody that isn't Sam Darnold in this market. And so if the Steelers can bring back a Justin Fields for a reasonable cost or a Russell Wilson for a reasonable cost, I don't see why you would make a move, really. None of the moves are going to move the needle enough to make you a contender. And so the best you can do is probably bringing back one of those two as the bridge. maybe a second year of chemistry leads to better results. This kind of brings me to just kind of looking back at the 2020 or 2012 and 2013 offenses in Pittsburgh. Those are Todd Haley's first 2 years with the Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger, he had been working with Arians, and that was kind of his guy. Um, the offense took a pretty big step back in 2012 and 2013. They were 21st in yards in 2012, and then they were 20th in yards in 2013. And then by Haley's third year, and this was really when Le'Veon Bell started breaking out, the Steelers were number 1 in yards. So these offensive coordinator quarterback relationships can take some time to blossom. Continuity can be good. Offensive coordinators will, modify their scheme a little bit to fit their personnel and fit their quarterback specifically. If you bring a guy like Russ back, I don't think it's going to be as rocky as the reports have stated it might have been towards the end of the 2024 season. Maybe some continuity could do that relationship good and actually provide better results. I mean, Russ didn't even have a full offseason to, install everything when you really think about it. So I'm not closed off to bringing back Wilson. I think I would prefer Fields. But all that to say, I do think one of those two will be back.
I'm with you. I just don't see the compelling talent that overrides the benefits of returning and retaining one of Russ or Fields. And I've leaned towards Fields as well, as I think most people have. But the benefits of the continuity to not have 5 straight years with 5 different week 1 starting quarterbacks, to be able to build something with a second year offensive coordinator. Stafford will be the most intriguing, as you said. There's no indication he's actually being shopped right now. There's a contract issue to work out with the Rams for him to play there in 2025. But until we hear that those talks aren't going anywhere or going well, I don't see the incentive for the Rams to be looking to trade Stafford when they're in a Super Bowl potential window in an NFC that's not as strong as the AFC. And then any other option you can give, Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, whoever, just is not an upgrade. And so there's no benefit at all to going down that path. It's a short-term path with a less mobile quarterback that's new, more unpredictability there. So it just makes more sense, as you said, to retain Russ or, again, preferably Justin Fields. With Haley, it's interesting. I'd have to go back and think about it. I mean, certainly there is value in continuity, and Haley, I think, has always been a skilled game planner, play caller. His offenses have generally produced. But how much of that improvement was him in the continuity, and how much of it was the O-line meshing and developing guys like Pouncey, DeCastro, et cetera, AB hitting his prime, drafting Le'Veon Bell? I just wonder how much we can point towards continuity versus just the offense got loaded with talent.
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, the offensive line right now, you could argue, is on the cusp of. I mean, I know a lot of people will probably push back on that, but there's a lot of pedigree on that offensive line. I think with the right amount of continuity, with the right amount of injury luck, I think they have the potential to make a big jump, whether that's this year or next year, or sorry, in 2025 or 2026. I would hope, if they don't, the Steelers have big problems given how much they've invested in that unit overall. But yeah, I get that with Haley. Probably not a 1-to-1 comparison, but I just thought it was interesting. I mean, you think back to that time and you think, oh, wow, those Haley offenses were good, but the first 2 years were not very good. And they did have Ben Roethlisberger, obviously for that time. So one question for you for Stafford in specific, in a perfect world where he is available, what's your approach? Like, because the Steelers obviously are looking towards the future. Seems like trading for Stafford would be more or less going all in on their current window and pawning off, maybe their ability to draft a quarterback in the next couple of years. I don't know what you'd have to give up, but it wouldn't be cheap, I wouldn't think, for a quarterback who won a Super Bowl within the last, handful of years here. Do you think it would even be worth doing? Like, do you think it would move the needle enough? Do you think what's your thoughts there?
I am conflicted because part of me says, as you said, you want to because I'm still of the stance that Pittsburgh's future and path out of purgatory, this rut they are clearly in right now, is to draft a quarterback in the first round. That long-term franchise option, no guarantee that guy, if you take him, will end up being that type of player. And the 25 class is not looking like the year to do that, although I'd have some potential arguments for if you love a Cam Ward or love a Shadur Sanders, what's stopping you from making that move? But that's maybe a separate discussion for a separate time. Um, so I still think that's the path, but I also recognize that Pittsburgh in their mindset is probably, and Albert Breer's made this case. I think he's made a strong case to say this is an aging defense with a 36-year-old Cam Hayward, TJ Watt's in his 30s, Minka Fitzpatrick getting close to there as well. Do you want to capitalize on the now and try to win with when this defense is still hopefully strong? They skidded towards the finish, but they've still been a top 10 scoring unit for the last 5 years. There's still enough talent there and some young guys that Joey Porter develops and that arc continues and improves. And same with Keanu Benton, added defensive lineman early in this year's draft, all that kind of stuff. So there is an argument to be made about winning now versus the future. I mean, obviously, I would get the allure of Stafford to be the most talented option out there. I'd have one question for him is, A, how much longer do you plan on playing? Because if this becomes a year-to-year thing, I don't want to go down that path. If there's a commitment of if he intends to play 3, 4 more years, then okay, that's something I can entertain more. But I do wonder, it certainly makes you a better team. It certainly makes you a team that you would now expect to win a playoff game. Does it make you a Super Bowl contender with Stafford in this AFC? I don't know if it does. And so I'm hesitant to go down that path.
Yeah, and would Stafford even want to go down that path, given, the moving from McVay to this offense is a little bit tough for
Well,
him.
if the contract is an issue where it just can't get done with the Rams, I guess that would be the catalyst to get him moved to a team that would pay him what he wants to get paid.
Yeah, certainly. But if at this point in his career, I don't know what his contract looks like. I don't know if there's a no trade clause to where he would have some say in where he goes. But would he really want to go to Pittsburgh? Is my question.
I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I think you'd written about the Stafford family seems open to a trade if that's the path that ends up being the only avenue to get that contract. And I don't know if he has a no trade clause, but if he gets traded, he needs a new deal. And so he has some sort of say in where he's going to go because trading for him means extending him and signing him. And of course, Stafford's going to have agency in that. And so there's kind of a de facto no trade clause, even if there's not a literal one in his contract.
True.
But besides him, and again, there's still there's been zero reporting that Stafford is available. It's just been all speculation and understanding there's a contract issue. There was an issue last year. It took a long time to get that deal done. And so some are wondering, could it get messy this year? But also, like, at what time do the Rams sit there and say, okay, we can't explore the contract talks anymore? It would have to, that decision would almost have to be made before the draft because you can't do that in July and then trade Stafford and have no quarterback avenue to explore.
Yeah, right. I mean, when did they rework his contract last year? I think it was a little bit later in the process. I think it was July or something.
I believe it was very late in the process that they finally got that thing over the finish line on whatever deal they did, and they're going to have to do something this year too. I can't find the exact date just off the top, but
yeah, I agree though. If something, we'll start hearing smoke pretty soon if they are kind of on the fence there and may be willing to trade him. I would feel like that would have to come, maybe even before the start of free agency. They should get that ball rolling because again, there's not very much quarterback talent in the draft.
It was July 30th that they finally got an agreement in place where I think Stafford basically just got a short-term pay raise for 2024. And so July 30th is right around the start of training camp.
Yeah. So do the Steelers really want to get in that situation again where you're sitting there waiting for a team to pull the trigger on a trade and you've done nothing to upgrade your position, and maybe by then Fields is signed elsewhere and you're, maybe even Russ is flirting with other teams at that point. Like, you don't want to go down that road.
And can you bring in free agents if teams have no idea who your quarterback is and you have no idea who your quarterback is and you're waiting on the Rams to try to figure stuff out? Can you sign a veteran free agent? Can you go trade for somebody? It's harder to do. It really puts your franchise in literal park until those things get resolved. And is it worth it? Is Stafford a better quarterback than Russ and Fields? Absolutely. No question about that. But are you Super Bowl caliber? What is your long-term outlook? You're kind of going all in on a weaker hand, not a weak hand, but a weaker hand compared to the rest of the table. And I don't get super excited about that. I get the logic of it, especially with this defense, because this defense is going to need an overhaul probably within 2 to 3 years in terms of starting to really retool that group. And the pendulum and the balance of this highest paid defense is going to start shifting the other way, where your draft capital in the offense over the last several seasons will start getting paid. We'll start drafting more rookies defensively, and your offense is going to start becoming a more higher paid unit. Hopefully, under the assumption you develop some of these guys and resign some of these guys that you have drafted early on, and of course, you're paying quarterback too. So, this defense will age out at some point, and I think Pittsburgh's mindset, and one reason why they have always had this all-in mentality, is we have this great defense, we have these pillars of our franchise of Minka and Cam and Watt, and we want to capitalize on that. And I'm sure, as Tomlin's talked about, one of his kind of biggest football regrets is not getting Marquise Pouncey a Super Bowl ring. Well, Cam Hayward has one career playoff win. TJ Watt has none. And so I imagine those thoughts in quiet moments keep Mike Tomlin up at night.
Yeah. I mean, if the Steelers organization has taught us anything since Roethlisberger left, or even in the last couple of years of his career, it's that they always think they have a chance. And so it should probably move forward with the assumption that they are going to make whatever move to make them the most competitive right now, and not necessarily with an eye on the future.
Right. And in Pittsburgh, to their credit and also potentially to their detriment, uniquely did not bottom out as a franchise once they lost their franchise quarterback in Ben. You see so many teams, they lose their guy, whether that was Peyton Manning or even Andrew Luck or Tom Brady in New England or Cam Newton in Carolina or Eli in New York, etc. And those teams really crash and then have to go draft that quarterback and then kind of rebuild. Pittsburgh, they regressed, but they didn't bottom out. They still have been a wild card playoff on the fringe type of team. And so it's just kind of unique in that sense. You don't see that too often, where the franchise quarterback goes away and they're still in the hunt. And it's mainly because of that defense.
It hasn't worked out for too many of those teams that have bottomed out, though. If you really look at it, it's not like they're a superior draft position as. I guess maybe there's probably a couple that I'm not thinking of right now, but the teams you just named, I mean, the Colts have been in purgatory for the most part. They started bringing in all these veteran quarterbacks. You have the Panthers, maybe a glimpse of hope right now with Bryce Young. That's kind of still TBD. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. People think the only path out is bottoming out, but a lot of these teams that bottom out don't necessarily bounce back very quickly. Sans the Commanders or somebody like that.
Right. Yeah. Bottoming out does not guarantee that you'll bounce back quickly. It gives you the chance to find that quarterback, and how well you select that quarterback and what his career arc determines if you bounce back quickly or not. And that's, the Panthers drafted Bryce Young, the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson, the Chargers, to an extent, after losing Phillip Rivers, they draft Herbert. They ended up bouncing back more in better than other teams. The Patriots drafting Drake May, and we'll see where that goes. And so, yeah, bottoming out just gives you the chance to find the quarterback. It does not. It comes with no guarantees on how good that experience goes and how long you're at the bottom for.
But it does come with some pretty guarantees of a lot of uncomfortableness throughout that, however long that might take.
Right. And Pittsburgh's never going to have the plan to tank and let's hit the reset button. And understandably so, no coaching staff says, let's be bad this year. Let's all lose our jobs, except for Mike Tomlin. But let's everyone else get fired because we're going to have a bad season. They're going to end up retooling this whole thing. It's not in Pittsburgh's DNA, and it's not really, I think, in most teams' DNA. It just inevitably happens whenever teams lose that franchise quarterback. So Pittsburgh's in a tough spot, though, obviously. I mean, they don't have any. There's no great quarterback option. I think people are trying to find what is this great option that's going to change the needle of the franchise. As it currently is constructed, there aren't really any of those doors to open.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would still argue, and I have this as my terrible take today. And I'm not saying Pittsburgh needs to do it or has to do it, but like we talk about this quarterback class so much. It's a bad quarterback class. There's no one out there's going to be 2 first-round picks in Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And so there aren't many options, but there are a couple options potentially out there to consider. And that doesn't even consider the second-round guys, depending on, what your flavor is there. But if Pittsburgh hypothetically loves a Cam Ward or a Shedeur Sanders, and those guys slip a little bit, if the Titans don't take a quarterback at 1, et cetera, what what is the rationale for Pittsburgh to not try to make a big blockbuster move and trade up for one of those guys?
I mean, it's a big swing. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't watched either of those top 2 guys extensively in terms of like tape review and stuff, but just from some of the TV tape throughout the year, I would probably lean Ward over Sanders. I think I do like Sanders competes, and I think there are some good traits, but I have questions about um, his size and maybe what his defining trait is otherwise. Ward, I mean, it's just such a big risk to make that swing in a year where there's no quarterbacks on the free agent market and there's barely any in the draft. I would think trading up to where you need to get to select one of these top 2 guys, it would be pretty costly. I know it's not going to be as costly as it would to trade up for a can't a quote unquote can't miss prospects like a Caleb Williams or whatever, but it's still going to be costly. And at that point, I mean, then you're not even making a first round pick in Pittsburgh for their first ever draft next year, which, I guess that doesn't factor into the calculation, but that would be kind of lame. I mean, you're really, really in a tough spot if that doesn't work out at that point.
Sure, there's risk, but if you tell me it's the franchise quarterback of the future for the next 10, 15 years, I don't care about not having a pick in Pittsburgh. I'll gladly trade that for my future franchise quarterback. And what is too much to trade for your future of the franchise? To me, there is no too much there. Now, of course, there's risk, and if you miss on the guy, then yeah, you're in big trouble. But at some point, Pittsburgh, I think, will have to trade up for a quarterback in the first round because they are a team that's going to win 9, 10 games in virtually every season. They're not going to have that top 5 pick to get that blue chip quarterback. You look at teams, and I mentioned this before, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, all traded up in the first round for their quarterback. Ravens were a little more unique situation. They're trading up to get back in the first round for Lamar at 32, but point still stands overall. So, again, I'm not saying that you need to do it in this year's class. And I'm just saying, like, if they love one of those quarterbacks, just put yourself in the position that they have fallen in love with Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, right or wrong, that is their stance. I think you have to at least consider that, talk out and kind of map out and game out that scenario, because at some point Pittsburgh's going to have to make a move for a quarterback, I think, in the first round.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If they're sold on somebody, you got to do it. It's just, are they sold on anybody this year? I mean, I think back to the Mason Rudolph draft year, and I don't know how much longer after he was drafted it came out that they had a first round grade on him. So there are times where, the Steelers might have a first round grade on a guy that the rest of kind of the zeitgeist or the consensus out there doesn't. And so, do they have a first round grade on a guy like Will Howard or, I guess there's some people that buzz about Kyle McCord or whoever it might be, that not very many people are high on. The Steelers could be. And so, could you make a move up for one of those kinds of guys? If you're really sold on a Sanders or Ward, sure. I mean, do it. But man, that is putting everything on the line in terms of, would Omar Khan even be safe at that point if things go sideways?
I get that, but no risk it, no biscuit, as what Bruce Arians would say. I mean, you got to take that chance. When they traded up, the Chiefs did for Mahomes, there probably were detractors about, oh, this guy's so underdeveloped and so raw and so freestyle. And, the Bills making incremental moves up the draft board for Josh Allen. And that first year, his accuracy's a mess. I mean, at that point, you got to trust your scouts. And if they say in your team, and if they say that he's the guy, then you got to go with that. You got to make a call at some point. So that's just my thought. It was actually, I think it was Colbert himself after they drafted Mason. I think in the post-draft interview they always do, that Colbert said they had a first-round grade on Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, so you never know. Yeah, some of these guys, they could be much higher on than the rest of us.
I mean, I do think most likely, in terms of what actually will happen, is that they retain one of Russ or Fields and then potentially look at a day two quarterback. As you said, Will Howard, Jalen Milroe. I don't know where Jackson Dart is at. People still pushing him as a first rounder. I'm not sure where that's coming from exactly, but some sort of day two quarterback with the retention of Fields or Russ on a 2-year deal is kind of my thought of how this thing might end up going.
Yeah, but I think back to this time last year, and I think I probably wrote several different times, Russ isn't going to happen, Fields isn't going to happen, and then of course they got both. So what do I know?
Yeah, this thing can be unpredictable and we're all along for the ride. So we'll see. Yeah, no decision has been made on Russ or Fields. I still think post combine and pre legal tampering period on March 10th is when somebody does resign. I think the combine will help set markets and spur conversations. And because the whole NFL is there. And so just kind of a natural starting point, and those conversations really ramp up as we get into March and free agency really comes into focus. Right now, it's still probably some draft prep and getting ready for the combine and getting everyone kind of ready for Indy itself. All right, Ross. Let's talk about just coaching here quickly, and then we'll kind of go back to some just general draft talks. I know you've been putting up some profiles and scouting. We're down there at the Senior Bowl, obviously. Ended up putting a article up yesterday about Gerald Alexander, the new defensive backs coach to replace Grady Brown. And you guys know, didn't love these subtractions of losing Grady Brown, losing Aaron Curry, the linebackers coach. That spot has still not been filled. Hopefully within the next couple of days, early next week, maybe we'll get a name there. Didn't love, though, losing those to what I perceive to be young and up and coming quality coaches, but did some more research on Gerald Alexander. And my conclusion for maybe one reason why Pittsburgh made the change of not renewing Grady Brown's contract is, Alexander stylistically, he's a much more intense, much more animated, a little more light a fire under you type of coach. And there's some clips out there of him coaching at Cal a decade ago, almost at this point, and more recently with the Raiders last year. And so I wonder if Pittsburgh wanted a different coach that was a little more, I don't want to say in your face. He's not like a yeller. That's not Alexander's game, but he's certainly more intense, more animated. And Brown, from what I was able to perceive at training camp and interviews, all those kinds of things, Hard Knocks even, is a much more reserved, lower key, type of coach. There's not a wrong way. It's not good or bad. It's just a different style. And I wonder if Pittsburgh was looking for a different style to maybe light more of a fire under Joey Porter Jr. and just have a different personality to lead that DB room.
Yeah, so going the butt kicker route like Zach Kazani last year, getting some more of those kinds of guys in the room. Yeah, I mean, I get the kind of disappointment with the coaching changes so far. I know that those guys were both viewed, pretty high. Or people had high opinions on both of them, but just looking at the production of their units over the last couple years, I think that there are some things that kind of could point to, okay, maybe this should have been seen coming. Like Joey Porter Jr.'s year 2, not the big jump Tomlin always talks about from year 1 to year 2. If anything, he might have regressed a little bit from year 1. I know he had some injury stuff to deal with in 2023, especially in the safety room. So it's difficult to evaluate. And I mean, even with these position coaches in general, it's difficult to evaluate. I mean, who knows, how much of it's the scheme, how much of it's the players themselves, and the injuries play in a factor, of course, and all that. So, yeah, I'm on board with that. I mean, I think they could use, they're going to be pairing Porter with another young guy soon. And so you want to get if you want to make a change, now's the right time to get, another young guy in the room soon, and kind of have Porter and whoever that is come up together under this new position coach here. So I'm open to it, especially after reading your article. Very good job on that, as always.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and as I mentioned previously, he's also a familiar name, Gerald Alexander. He had coached in Pittsburgh in 2022 and 2023. And I'm thinking he actually helped come to Pittsburgh in the first place because he ended up coming on staff in 2022. Was not listed by the team as a coach until 2023, one of those kind of unlisted names, the way that Ryan Shazier and Vince Williams were in 2024. I think that was because of Brian Flores, because Alexander it was in Miami with B-Flow in 2020 and 2021 until Flores got fired, and then ended up coming to Pittsburgh, obviously, and Alexander seemed to follow him because of that. So it's kind of interesting to probably thank Brian Flores for getting Gerald Alexander in the door to Pittsburgh, and then takes the Raiders safety job. Last year, that whole coaching staff regime gets turned over. He ends up coming back to Pittsburgh. On Porter, what in his game needs to develop? Obviously, the penalties is the big thing. It's the elephant in the room. It has to get worked on. Just stacking bad penalties last year was his issue. But beyond that, what other parts of his game need to develop?
Well, I think his ball skills. I mean, maybe he just is what he is at this point with the turnover production. But that certainly hasn't been a high point of his game. I think there's
right, but he had like one pick at Penn State. I think it's just maybe as you
right. Maybe
said,
that's just who he is.
There's not a good track record of him being a ball hawk.
Right. And yeah, I guess you just kind of hoped that could improve in the NFL. Maybe it won't, which is fine. You don't need to be. I mean, Ike Taylor showed us you don't need to be a ball hawk to be a good corner. And so that's all fine. I think his tackling was overall pretty good this last year. Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. I think the penalties is obviously the easy thing to point at there.
Yeah, I mean, there were, I'm sure, countless number of small things to work on. And Porter himself in that Hard Knocks, one of the final shots, if not the final shot of Pittsburgh featured in Hard Knocks, was talking about rededicating himself in the classroom and just trying to be a new me next year. So there are certainly, I'm sure, things if you talk to the coaching staff to work on, still in terms of technique, in terms of your press, in terms of playing off, in terms of film study, being a leader. He talked about he wants to really become a more presence in that room as he kind of quickly becomes one of the more veteran names in there, especially if Dante Jackson is not re-signed. If they were to draft somebody or something like that, if a Cam Sutton leaves, if James Pierre leaves, Porter's really going to become quickly an elder statesman of a cornerback in Pittsburgh. So it's not to say there aren't things to work on, but when we sit there and really have to talk it out, the penalties is obvious, but besides that, he's given up one touchdown in 2 years. He faces number one receivers routinely. He travels. He's in tough matchups. He's in 5-star matchups basically every single week. And overall, he's held his own. So I just wonder, even for myself, do we give him enough credit for the job he's done? Because the penalties are negative, but look at the overall body of work, and there's a lot to like there still.
Yeah, I think I guess the missed tackles actually were a bigger issue than I thought this past year. He had 10, which I don't know where that ranks league wide, but maybe a little bit left on the bone there. But yeah, I think overall his trajectory's fine. I just I think after that year one, there was so much excitement about how much he was shutting down some of these big name guys, and it was really up and down in 2024. He'd have one great week, and then he'd have one or two pretty rough ones with penalties kind of being the main culprit. But he was taking some chunks there in coverage as well without the penalties at times. Trying to think back to which games. What was it the Commanders? He had a tough one. So yeah, but overall, I mean, he's arrow's still pointing up, I think. But I just think the change in the coaching room might have been a necessary. I mean, Mike Tomlin is a secondary guy. That's his kind of specialty. So if he thought a change was needed, I tend to trust him.
But Terrell Austin stayed, and he's a secondary guy too. His whole background is defensive backs, and now he's under contract. Pittsburgh, unless the situation is just dire, they do not fire coaches. They let contracts expire and non-renew, and that was the case with what appears to be the only two coaching changes in Pittsburgh, and the linebackers coach in Curry, the DBs coach in Grady Brown. The one thing I was excited to learn and really dive into about Gerald Alexander was he seems to keep the same standard and hold in the same high regard, taking the football away. He said the quote, might be paraphrasing a bit, but playing to win instead of not to lose and having this aggressive ball first mentality. There was even a story I read about him at Cal when he coached DBs there from 2017 to 2019. He dubbed his DB room the Takers. which was a movie reference to some movie that I saw on Rotten Tomatoes, was not well received. But putting that aside, the point was, they wanted to be a ball hawk group, and there were a lot of competitive things they would do, whiteboards in the practice or in the team facility that would kind of track turnovers and create competitions, similar things to what were happening in Pittsburgh this year with their t-shirts and turnover culture, which Brown was in charge of, according to Mike Tomlin. And so Alexander certainly seems to be a group that wants to take the football away, have this DBs have that mindset. I don't think that happened a whole lot with the Raiders last year, but it's probably hard to really blame Alexander for that based on just talent and development, young guys out there. And, those things aren't always in a coach's control.
Yeah, and even with Brown, the turnover well kind of dried up down the stretch of the season. That was one of the big reasons they stopped winning games. So if he was in charge of it, that's I guess another possible reason to point to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be lower. They had 33 takeaways as a team that tied for the NFL lead. They had 15 interceptions from their DB room. Dante Jackson had a career high. Beanie Bishop had the second most ever by UDFA in Steelers history for a rookie. I mean, I think what it came down to probably were the communication breakdowns. They did get cleaned up at the very end of the season, but there was that 4-game stretch where it was just a disaster, just simple 3-by-1 motions that were tripping them up, simple switch releases that Pittsburgh just could not handle for some reason. That was super frustrating. And then I do think maybe stylistically, if they wanted a coach that was a little more intense, I don't know if I would call, to an earlier comment that you made, I don't know if I would call Alexander the butt kicker that Azani is. I think Azani, from what I can tell, and I'm just basing this off of, articles and snippets of video here and there. It's not like I'm friends with all these guys or anything like that. But Azani seemed to be a little more tough love than Alexander. Alexander certainly more intense, more vocal, more animated. I don't know if he was quite as tough love as Azani, but I do think maybe they wanted a different style, different personality in that room. And that's a contrast there between Alexander and Grady Brown.
Fair enough.
All right, Ross, let's go back to the NFL draft here. We got about 100 reports already up on the site, which is fantastic. We are well ahead of pace. Last year, we did over 300 as a site. And so I'm really, really excited to see where this thing goes for 2025. I know you've got a couple reports up. Talk me through some guys you've watched recently, some players you like. Tell me about Damian Martinez. Seems to be a real tough runner.
Yeah, he's probably, of the guys I've watched, my favorite so far. He played at Oregon State. He ran behind that excellent offensive line. Talis Fuaga was there. Obviously, when he was there, he transferred to Miami there for his last season. I think he did have some off-field stuff. I think he had, some kind of arrest last year. Whatever, but it's in the report. But he on the field, I mean, as impressive as you're going to get for a guy that's his size. I think he came in at 226. But he, I mean, for a guy his size, his lateral agility is almost unfair. People look at a guy like Najee Harris and don't necessarily see the high end traits in terms of like lateral agility or breakaway speed. Martinez isn't going to have the breakaway speed, but man, he can sure make up for it with his vision and just kind of making these very sudden cuts. You only watch 4 or 5 games when you do one of these scouting reports. And in those 4 or 5 games, there was, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 different plays where Martinez is just in basically a scrum, churning his legs for an additional 5, 10, 15 yards. I mean, just dragging like the entire defense. And so, Najee Harris has done that a time or two, certainly. You see that with Martinez. Is he as polished as Harris in every part of his game? No. Martinez definitely needs some work in terms of pass protection, definitely needs some work in terms of receiving, was not used very much as a receiver. Not the most natural catcher with his pass catcher with his hands. He does drop balls and stuff like that. So, he's probably not ready to be an every down back, but in terms of just running the football and being kind of that, yin and yang type of deal with Jaylen Warren, I think it could be a decent fit. I know a lot of people are looking for somebody who can get the edge or whatever. Jerry Dulac said the Steelers will be looking for somebody who will get the edge with speed. And I see some merit to that, but this is a draft class where there are so many good running backs that could potentially be kind of every down bell cows. And, I would hate to pass up on one of those guys just to be chasing a trait like speed, especially when the Steelers have not had good luck with those types of backs in the past. McFarland, I mean, all the way back to I don't know, Chris Rainey, guys like these
Archer.
Archer, all kinds of guys, examples of that. So Martinez, very intriguing. The size, the power, the lateral agility. I think his speed's fine for how big he is overall. Yeah, I'm pretty high on him overall.
He'll be at the combine, Martinez, right? I assume he got the invite.
Yes, he will be at the combine. He was somebody that was viewed pretty highly. I think there was a bit of a recruiting war for him once he got into the portal out of Oregon State there. I think Arizona made a push to get him, and then last second he ended up at the U. Yeah, so in terms of him, and I also watched Ollie Gordon.
Well, let me just ask you about Martinez. I had a quick just follow up. Not that it's the end all, but what do you think he'll run? I'm just curious if he does run the 40. What kind of speed are we talking? I know he's not a burner. But we like a 4.5 guy. We talking more 4.6. What do you think his 40 time would be?
Yeah, low 4.5s probably. I think I asked him. I asked most of the guys at the Senior Bowl, and if they have a goal, he declined to answer that. So, but he did
most
say
guys
he'd be
do.
Right. Yeah, he did. Well, actually, I got a lot of answers
to
that question this year, but he declined to answer. But he did say he'd be running it. I think opinions change once it gets closer, and their agents are in their ears and stuff like that. But I could see based on what I saw on tape, maybe a 4.52, 4.53 kind of guy in that ballpark.
Did any Senior Bowl guys say like I'm going to run 4.3 or I'm going to break Xavier Worthy's record? Do you get any kind of out of pocket predictions?
I didn't get break the record, but Darian Porter did say he's looking for 4.3 and maybe even lower. So 4.29, 4.28. He threw that out there. So that's one to watch for sure, especially given his dimensions as a corner.
One of those avatar corners, right?
He's one of those avatars, and he's one of those guys who blocked 4 punts in college, and a lot to like, a lot that the Steelers would probably be attracted to. Kind of earned his way through special teams and was kind of a late bloomer at corner. So an interesting guy there.
Was he a receiver to start his Iowa State career? And Pittsburgh's gone down that well a time or two.
Yeah. And he was very impressive in terms of hearts and smarts. Just talking to him, you could tell he loves the game. You could tell he does his, he's very studious. He's a student of the game. The special team stuff, he's not afraid of that. He is kind of a little bit lean for how tall he is. He's pretty thin overall. I think he said the main guy he watches is like a Tariq Woolen. And so, but in terms of his size, I think he hits better. He plays bigger than his size. I think a lot of that has to do with his experience on special teams as a gunner, blocking punts, really every phase of special teams he was a part of. So,
name to watch. I cut you off. What other prospect were you going to pivot to?
Oh, just another running back, Ollie Gordon. I was pretty fairly high on him going into the Senior Bowl week. Just after watching his. You watch his 2023 tape and you're like, oh my goodness, this guy got over 2,000 total yards between, yards from scrimmage. And really a big fall off in 2024. You look at that Oklahoma State team and they were just bad overall in 2024. I mean, nothing about that team was good in 2024. I think they were last place in their conference there. So, you kind of wonder how much of his drop off was because of that, how much is, his fault. And I think he dealt with a couple minor injuries in 2024, but nothing that should have hampered him that much. But yeah, the big drop off. So I was very curious to watch him at the Senior Bowl. I think he probably didn't look as good as I had hoped. He wasn't very explosive looking, which, he came in a little bit heavier than expected at 233 pounds, which is massive. Yeah. He came in a little shorter than expected. I think they had him listed 6'2". He came in at like 6'1" and, maybe like 4/8 or 3/8 or something like that. And so, coming in a little shorter, coming in a little heavier, probably the opposite direction of what I was hoping for, and just didn't look explosive. Now, watching him on tape, there were times where, okay, wow, his long speed is much better than you would expect from a back this big. And so I think, is he going to be a guy that runs the 40? Is he going to opt out and just, hope teams look at his 2023 tape? I think he has more of an all-around skill set than a guy like Martinez. He's definitely capable as a pass catcher. I think he's capable in pass protection, but the issue with him is and he told me this at the Senior Bowl, he tends to dive at ankles a lot and go for the cut blocks, which makes no sense when you're 233 pounds. You should be able to take on, pretty much anybody at that size. And he told me that he's like, at my size, I shouldn't be diving at ankles anymore. So that's something I need to work on. And the few times you saw him, do that on tape, he looked fine. So I don't know what the deal is, why he was diving at ankles. That's just his instinct. He told me that his excuse for it, I was like, is that a confidence thing or what is it? And he said, well, when I hit somebody, I'm looking to, turn them upside on their head, like basically hit them so hard that they do a flip kind of thing. And so maybe a little overzealous there. Another guy who had some off the field, I think he had some kind of arrest leading into his final season there. And so, have to do your homework on that. I talked to him for, probably about 10 minutes at the Senior Bowl, and he seemed like a good enough guy, funny, engaged. He seemed the hearts and smarts in terms of his film study and stuff all seemed to be there, at least from what you can gather from an interview, which isn't always, perfect because some of these guys are smooth talkers. But yeah, not a guy I was as impressed with after the Senior Bowl week, but his tape in 2023 is intriguing enough to be, maybe, he's a big back. The Steelers like their big backs, and I think he did talk to Tomlin at the Senior Bowl. So running back class certainly has all shapes and sizes. Marcus Yarns from Delaware is a guy I'm starting to look into. There's not enough tape that I can find on him to do a full report, but as soon as there is, I'm going to jump on him right away. He's a kind of he's going to be a quick, very, very fast back, but he's a receiver. He's, almost as much of a receiver as he is a running back. Not in terms of splitting him out wide, but man, he can absolutely create separation out of the backfield on these routes. Even at the Senior Bowl, he was making people look silly. He was very productive at Delaware. I think he had something like 32 touchdowns and quite a bit of receiving yards to pair with his rushing production. So he is an interesting one, and not as heralded coming from Delaware. Not a huge program. I think he said he'd be the first guy from his high school that ever made it to the NFL, and so he's kind of carrying his whole hometown there. He seemed like a very good guy when I talked to him at the Senior Bowl. 5'11", 190 pounds. So he'd be more maybe of a change of pace type of back. And, so that depends on what you think of Jaylen Warren. Do you think he is, let me ask you this. Do you think Jaylen Warren can step into this every down role like Najee Harris and be successful without the presence of a guy like Najee Harris?
Well, it's interesting. Pittsburgh for a long time in the Bell era, the James Conner era, when healthy, even the Willie Parker era, they were a one-horse team. They were not the committee approach. And then once Warren emerged, Harris went from being that workhorse back as a rookie to that committee approach. I think Warren can step into the 1A role if you kind of want to look in those terms. He was 1B to Harris 1A. I think Warren can be 1A, but will they attempt to take some of the workload off his shoulders? What Warren's role as 1B was, obviously he'd rotate in offensively, but he was the third down back, very good pass protector, good receiver, hard effort type of a guy. Would he remain the third down back still, or would Pittsburgh try to reduce some of that workload by finding someone to replace him? I don't want Warren to be that Najee Harris, classic bell cow, 300 carry type of guy. I don't think that's the best thing for him. I think the team has found the benefit of that committee approach, and so you need to have a 1B there. But the question is, what is that skill set? Is it going to be a real good pass protector to become the new third down back, or do you want a good runner that still rotates with Warren and so he can play on third down? I wonder how Pittsburgh will walk that line. So it's a little nuanced to it. I think Warren can be the 1A, but he shouldn't just be the number one flat out.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, there's so many good big backs that I would almost be a little disappointed if they didn't grab one of these big guys and kind of keep Warren in his current role. But that's just me.
I mean, but I think his carry should go up. I think I'd want to keep him on the third down rule too, especially to trust a rookie on third downs to start the season's a little risky until they prove themselves. I mean, Warren did, but not everyone's going to do that. And so I think his carries ramp up by some odd number, but I want to keep him in the third down role, which means still rotating him on early downs with, say, a rookie runner. It's interesting on yarns, and maybe it's not interesting. It's interesting to me, at least, the history, and it is just that history that I remember, and I need to double check this, but I think the last time Pittsburgh drafted a running back that was not in the Power Five or Power Four, whatever they're calling it these days, I think it was like 1970 something with
Oh,
Sidney
wow.
Thornton at a Northwestern State, 1977 second round selection. I remember earlier this year looking through that just to see, and I can't remember exactly what the question I had asked myself and all that, but they've always been pedigree guys, especially recently. They draft Najee Harris from Alabama, they draft James Conner from Pitt, they draft Le'Veon Bell from Michigan State. Obviously, Parker was undrafted and emerged out of nowhere, North Carolina. That type of thing. Rashard Mendenhall from Illinois. So even for guys like an RJ Harvey from UCF, would they take him? I think Harvey's a really interesting guy. Could check some boxes what Pittsburgh is looking for. Had a good Senior Bowl week, I think, in your estimation, Ross. But I just wonder about do they get too caught up in pedigree when it comes to positions like running back?
Yeah, that's fair. But I mean, even that pool of running backs, there's probably 20 guys that are draftable in that Power Five that are or Power Four now,
Sure.
that are plenty intriguing. And I'm sure we will get more clarity throughout this process with that group.
Is there a
Obviously,
running back that you really like, even maybe one you didn't write the report on? Is there just a guy in this class besides Shenty? Just put him aside for the moment. Is there a
yeah.
running back that you think Pittsburgh should be going after, say in that day two range?
Kansas's Devin Neal is the most intriguing to me. I think he showed that his route running in the one-on-ones in Mobile was excellent. He was getting separation. Um, I think he held up pretty well in pass protection. I think he said the biggest knock on him that people talked about, at least when I asked him, was his speed, and he seems to have plenty of speed. So I don't know where that knock comes from, but he seems to have plenty of speed. Maybe not like kick it into the seventh gear and you know hit a home run type of speed, but much more than like a Najee Harris, for example. He has the hearts and smarts. Absolutely. Talking to him at the Senior Bowl, very well spoken. Very, I mean, talks about his film study, talks about how he prepares. Um, Seems to have it all. He's got some size to him. I think he's, it's kind of he's a difficult guy to place in the draft, and kind of going through my first mock last week, and I really wanted to get him in there. I tried really hard to, but just the way that the board falls, depending on how you feel about him. It's just, I don't know if the Steelers are going to be looking at a running back as early as that, given how many there are. That's I guess a tough thing to calculate. But Devin Neal is absolutely somebody I could see in Pittsburgh.
I'm with you. I think a really interesting guy. I wrote the report on him for Steelers Depot. You can check that out. And he's got a really good blend because there is some size. He's not small. He's not as big as a Najee Harris, but he's well proportioned. He's well built, a pretty thick frame. I think he came in 5'10", just under 5'11", 220. So certainly that'll check some of the size boxes. But there is more explosiveness. There is more burst than what a Najee Harris had. When I watched him initially, I thought the long speed was good. I watched a bit more before filing my report and thought maybe that, as you said, that true top end speed isn't there. I think he's going to run to put some numbers to it to try to put some objective metrics to what we kind of couch his speed at. I think he'll run mid 4.4s, high 4.4s. Is that kind of your feel of it?
Yeah, I think he might have been one of the guys that answered my question. And if you filibuster for just a second.
And while I do that and let you look that up, I mean he's got hands. He's a really good athlete overall. He played on the baseball team at Kansas. He was recruited by some schools, by Princeton, especially as to play baseball and and play football. He was an outfielder briefly for a season at Kansas and then put baseball aside to focus full time on football. I also think Pittsburgh will appreciate his loyalty. He stayed at Kansas his whole time. I think he had opportunities to transfer and go elsewhere, but he wanted to finish his career at Kansas, not exactly the most power program in the world, left as the school's all-time leading rusher. And so there's probably some intangible things Pittsburgh will appreciate.
Yeah, two-time captain, I think, as well. And he told me he wants to run. He said he's expecting to run a high 4.4. So,
Okay.
yeah.
That's basically that was kind of my read of it too. Was in that 4.45 to 4.49, not to get too granular, but that was my thought. So the speed is good. It's not incredible, but it's a good blend of everything. And he showed the ability to be the workhorse if he was ever needed. I remember watching it live last year. I didn't watch a ton of. I mean, I watched college football. But I'm kind of just like background noise because Saturdays is my day off to go to the grocery store or whatever. But that Colorado game when he had 37 carries, and I mean, he really put the team on his back in that game. Just kind of flashed what the top end of Devin Neal's game can be.
Yeah, and he told. I mean, Kansas runs wide zone, I think, primarily, or at least that's what he told me. So experienced in kind of the scheme that the Steelers, that Arthur Smith likes.
And if he does get drafted, I found a photo of him when my research. He's a big Kansas fan. That's why he went there. He's from the area. He's from Lawrence, Kansas. Number one recruit in the state, but stayed there over Oklahoma State. He grew up a Jayhawks fan. There's a photo of him attending the '08 men's basketball championship parade. There's a photo of him as like a little kid, which is kind of fun, meaningless, but stuff that I just like research and come across along the way. But yeah, he can catch 77 career receptions. He's pedigree. He played up to competition. I think he's a guy that could be in range. I mean, these running backs are all clumped together, I think, once you get past Genty. But I think third round is probably sensible for him, and that probably aligns with where Pittsburgh will look for a back, assuming Harris does not return.
Yeah, well, bring it on. I'd love to have him.
Also, what about Travion Henderson from Ohio State? You really want true open it up type of speed. He's probably one of the fastest backs in this class. I didn't love him between the tackles. There's not a ton of power there. But if you want kind of that home run hitter from a big time school, I think Henderson is going to make sense for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I haven't watched a ton of him, at least closely. I think just from watching, TV tape stuff, I think Judkins kind of stood out to me more between the two, but certainly the speed is something to look at.
Which Judkins, what's his speed like? What's his big play? I don't want to get too hung up on that, but if it is something Pittsburgh's looking for, something to mention there. I don't think he was as fast as Henderson.
No, he's probably in that
guy.
same. Yeah, he's probably roughly the same kind of dimensions and speed as a Devin Neal. Probably rough comparison there.
What about Omarion Hampton from North Carolina? We haven't mentioned his name too much. He could be the second back taken behind Ashton Genty. That may be potentially a little too early for Pittsburgh's at mid-second round with that second round selection. But, he was one of the first guys I watched. I probably should go back and watch him. Every time I watch one of those first or second profiles, I'm a little rusty. And so I kind of need to probably reevaluate him. I thought he had a good, well-rounded game. I didn't love maybe a standout trait, but he's got size and production for days.
Yeah, you compared him to Rashad White, it looks like.
Yeah, I really had a tough time with that comp. Again, that was one of the first ones. I don't know, maybe that's a bad comp, but I don't know if you had a name in mind of who he kind of reminded you of. Was he a Senior Bowl guy? Hampton?
No.
Okay.
No. So I don't have a super well-formulated opinion on him at this point, but.
All right, Ross, I want to mention briefly, I know you talked about him, I think in the round table, maybe in the round table, but I know for the Depot Dive, you mentioned him, Jared Ivey from Ole Miss. And I know you were kind of conflicted. What is he? He's kind of a tweener. Is he an edge guy? Is he a 3-4 defensive end, hand down, hand up? I think you mentioned this, Trevor Sycamore rated him as number 1, 3-4 defensive end. What's your take on that? Could he play the end in Pittsburgh?
I think he absolutely can. He seems to want to stay as an edge, but I guess you make more money out there, whatever it might be. He did play primarily out on the edge in 2024 with Ole Miss. They had a ton of D-line talent there, so I think he did actually play more inside as like a 5 or even like a 4-eye all the way down to 3. In 2023, he said that was out of necessity. just because of the personnel that they had in place and some of the edge rushers they had there. But he absolutely does have experience with his, hand in the dirt, kind of inside 5 tech 4, whatever. And so just looking at his body type when you walk past him in the interview room in Mobile, he looks much more like a Cam Hayward or a Stephon Tuitt kind of a defensive end type than he does somebody you'd expect to be out on the edge. I don't know if he necessarily has like the speed to consistently win around the arc or, get the corner on tackles. So I think he is probably better suited to move inside especially if he can add. I think he weighed in at 283. He's got the length. I think he's, I don't know I don't have it in front of me, but 6'5" and 283. His arm length is solid. He has very active hands. He's got a lot of good moves that he likes to use, and so he actually has pretty well refined set of counter moves too. So when stuff doesn't go well, he does kind of string moves together pretty well. So I think he can absolutely bring a lot of pressure from that defensive end position, holding up against the run. He was solid. Like I said, he probably needs to add a little bit of weight to hold up against NFL tackles and guards consistently, but from what I saw on tape, he held up fine against the run. His anchor is actually much better than you'd expect. So overall, I don't know how he stacks up in terms of if I'd put him number one for 3-4 defensive ends. I think there's probably a couple of guys out there that are maybe on the bigger end of things at like 300, 305, 310 that I might classify better in that range. I mean, Cam Hayward played like over half of his snaps kind of more inside and not 5 tech last year. So you need a guy who can kind of shift even further inside than just 5 tech. So, maybe a little more size would be ideal. I get there's a lot of people kind of worried about that, what you would call, I guess, tweener, but his frame looks much more capable of packing on weight than, some of these other guys like a Shamar Stewart or like a, Landon Jackson, some of these true like Darius Robinson type oversized edge rushers that are super athletic and have like a lean mass frame. This guy has got some size to his frame. Absolutely. Jared Ivey, that is.
Is there more bulk than Robinson? Because his frame, and I really hadn't looked at him. I probably should really look at him. He kind of reminded me of Robinson, but maybe I'm off on that. How would you compare his frame to Darius Robinson?
Let's see. Ivy 605.5, 283. Yeah. So probably pretty comparable if you just look at the height weight, but the distribution,
the body type. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. The distribution of that weight is, maybe more he just looks thicker than a guy like Robinson. Robinson was very like just cut.
Yeah, his legs look thicker for Ivy, looks like, comparing him to Robinson. So yeah, I mean, you make a good point that height and weight's important, but also like body composition and makeup. You can have guys of similar or identical even height and weight, and they can look totally different in their body types.
Yes, and just looking at him, I mean, I think it was after I got a picture of him and I was talking to Jonathan Heitritter, and I was like, man, he looks like a defensive end. He does not look like an edge rusher. And so I think Jonathan asked him if he could play inside. He said, he definitely can. But I think he prefers edge. So, I'm sure with teams talking to him, that might change over the next few weeks. And I'm eager to talk to him at the combine to see if anything's changed on that front.
Yeah, and see where teams are evaluating him. Do they view him more as an edge, or is the D-line coach talking to them? Is the linebackers coach talking to them? He does feel almost a little too big to play out there on the edge in a 3-4 system in Pittsburgh. It does feel like maybe a little more inside, but you're right. The 5-tech in Pittsburgh isn't so much of a thing anymore. That old school Okie front. Pittsburgh played more sub package in 2024 than they have the past decade. And even in the 3-4, you're playing more 4-eye inside shade, and certainly in sub package, you're playing a lot of 3-tech. And so that would be the primary alignment for a guy like Jared Ivey.
Yeah, and so that's the big question: is can he hold up in there to double teams and stuff like that? And I get that's probably going to be people's main worry with him. So,
is he a first round guy? Is that the buzz on Ivey right now?
I think I gave him a second grade. But It's
in terms
tough with
of
this.
projection. Yeah, in terms of what if Sikkema has him as a number 1, 3, 4 D end, does that imply he's going to be a first round guy? Where's kind of the consensus on where he'll go?
I think Sycama's a little bit of an outlier with his
Okay, what it
placement of
looks like.
him. But mock draft database, just for reference, which this is just kind of
Hmm.
the
But
zeitgeist.
that's what I kind of go to get a gauge of it all.
Yes, this shows him in the 78 range. So yeah, second-ish.
But I'm looking down at some of there's a bunch of mocks that are putting him in late first round. So I wonder if that overall aggregate rank is lagging a little bit. I mean, I don't know. There's a million mock drafts out there, but it looks like there's a little more buzz. Actually, it seems like just one guy seems to be putting the Ivy in the first round of all his mock drafts. So maybe that is creating some noise there. So a really interesting guy though to watch, and I really want to learn more about Jared Ivey.
Yeah, absolutely. His tape was a lot of fun. If he can add that weight, and I think he's definitely a guy that could be on the Steelers' radar. And Mike Tomlin was absolutely watching him in Mobile. I'll say that.
Yeah, I know you and Jonathan were all over that. Like, and it was every day. Tomlin, he didn't float around really. It seemed
No.
like he was just looking at D line the whole time.
Yeah, usually he's D line first day, and then he's
Right.
going and looking at the corner. No, he was locked in on the D line every single day.
That is really interesting because you're right. In all the years that I'd been to the Senior Bowl, he would, he'd be in one position group for the day, but then he would float around throughout they're usually there the first 2 days. I think sometimes they duck out early on that third day of practice. I saw him leave the one year, but usually he's kind of mixing position groups. And so if he's just D line, I mean, you could almost write in pen they're going to take a defensive lineman within the top 2 rounds.
Absolutely.
Run through, Ross, some of the other profiles you've done or any other guys that you've watched. I don't know how far you are on CJ Dupree from Alabama, but Arian Smith and Ratledge. Kind of just give me the skinny. I'd like to just get some names out there and kind of give me your quick evals on those guys.
Yeah, Tate Ratledge is an interesting guy. I was really hoping he'd be down there at the Senior Bowl. I try to do my early reports on guys at the Senior Bowl, so I have a better idea of what I'm watching. And every year it seems like last year I hit Troy Fautanu and then he ended up no showing. This year, Tate Ratledge, similar situation. So I didn't get to look at him in Mobile, but very impressed by Ratledge. He's got size, power, athleticism. He's got a ton of experience all at guard. So he's what you would want, in terms of if the Steelers could get him, probably not going to be looking that high at a guard, but man, he would be a good guy to pair with Mason McCormick. He's got the nastiness, he's finishes plays. He kind of does the whole Zach Frazier try to finish with a pancake thing. He times his first steps really good. He times this, off the snap count. He's very reactive. His reaction speed seems to be good. He doesn't necessarily he is athletic, but I don't know if there's something about the angles he takes. Climb into the second level is a little inconsistent. But overall, if it's big on big and just him drive blocking somebody one-on-one, he's usually winning that. His hands, use of hands, solid. One of the better guards in this class, I would think. I haven't watched all of them, but in terms of just the experience and some of the traits, I actually compared him to a bigger and more refined, or not a more refined Mason McCormick. Essentially, he's got that same kind of athletic profile. He's got the nastiness. He's got the power. Just a more refined version of him, obviously coming from a bigger school, going against better competition. And so I think I had him in the second round in my grade. Arian Smith is somebody I was looking forward to. That is the Georgia receiver. So both of these last two guys, Georgia. Arian Smith actually impressed me in Mobile. And so I was like, okay, let's do a report on him. I was not impressed with his tape at all.
No.
Yeah, very rough. He was a track athlete and a very good one at that, like world-class type of speed. He ran in college, in high school and college. He ran track. And he ran a 10.39 in the 100 meter, which is very good. He got like 7th place in, I think it was 2021, his conference championship in track and field for sprints. And so this is a guy with supposed world-class speed. And so you flip on the tape expecting to see him, blow the top off of defenses. But for whatever reason, that was just not the case. This is also a guy who's had just the worst injury luck. He had a hip in 2024. Hip was more minor, but he broke his wrist coming out of high school, didn't end up getting that wrist repaired until he got to college. I don't think he knew the full extent of the thing until he got there and kind of got with the team doctors there. And so they had him repair it and he redshirted. And then I think the following year he had a meniscus as well as I don't want to missay, but some other 2 injuries at the same time that year that kind of knocked him out for the year there. And so he's had a ton of injuries, and maybe some of that slowed him down a little bit. But I was just looking for him to blow the top off of defense, and he really wasn't. Pair that with, gosh, what is the drop number of drops he had was frightening in this past season. I think he had 10 drops in 2024, which is
on 48 receptions, so it's not like he had a million targets or something like that.
Right. And so that part's tough. At the Senior Bowl, I had heard that drops were an issue for him, and he made some of the best catches of the week in Mobile. And so I was really kind of looking for better tape, and just wasn't impressed. But, is there a team that might get enamored with his speed? Maybe, he's a little light as well. And so he's not like a height, weight, speed guy. He's just a speed guy. So I think I put him in like the 7th, but I could see him going undrafted, honestly. Despite kind of that, that world-class speed just doesn't show up for whatever reason. So,
did he drop anything at the Senior Bowl? I mean, you said he made great catches. Were there any focus drops or anything like that?
Not that I saw. No, it was solid on that front. So, and the same thing of going back to Damian Martinez earlier, his pass pro was rough on tape. It looked good in Mobile. And so, it's hard to know what to make of that sometimes. You hope these players are improving, but, and you really say they're improving off of just a day or two. Could just be, sample bias or whatever. But
Right. Is he a special teams guy? I see 5 tackles this past year. I don't know if that's from just interceptions. Yeah, for Arian Smith, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Gunner. He played some gunner. So, yeah, some value there potentially. But it's 175 pounds, I think. So that's, that's a little rough.
It gets you beat up there. So interesting, though. I think receivers as gunners can have value because they know how to get off the line. And that's what you basically are doing as a gunner. So I wonder if this may be some late day 3 value. But it seems like medical is going to get checked out. And 1-year production guy seems like, right? Because he just didn't do anything until 2024.
Yeah, I think the injuries held him back, and finally, yeah, he had an okay year. I think 900 some yards or something, 800 some, high up there. So he had an okay year, and I think he did actually make some pretty big plays and big moments for Georgia. But there was also, like I said, a lot of drops.
Anything on? Is it Dupree? I don't know how to pronounce it, from Alabama, the tight end. Have you started him yet?
I just started watching him last night. Don't have a very fully formed opinion on him yet. I think you had him on in your first. I know those late round mocks are kind of just throwing interesting guys out there.
Yeah. But this guy I was interested in, so I'm happy to see the report getting filed on him. And any initial? I know you said he just started, but any initial thoughts on him, especially as a blocker?
Yeah, that's the part that so far is standing out. He does. He finishes blocks well. I think he is maybe his technique is a little bit all over the place in terms of his hand usage and stuff. But when he gets his hands on you and when that's going well, he has some power to him. I think he's like roughly 6'5", 260 range, something like that. So an interesting guy, especially with is Connor Hayward moving on. I can't imagine that. Hayward's still under contract, but is the team sticking with him? I think there's at least some chatter of did he play a big enough role? I think special teams will probably keep him around, especially on the cheap rookie contract. But for 2026, you need to start stocking those shelves. And then Michael Pruitt, are you bringing him back? He's like 34 at this point or something like that.
Bad knees probably, so I don't think he's coming back.
So, yeah, I could see a tight end late, and, one of these guys who can block might be, just what the Steelers are looking for that 3 tight end personnel.
I'm with you. So, interesting guy I want to check out whenever the full report comes out. Anybody else? I was going to run through some names, but I didn't want to cut you off if you had any any other prospects to mention?
No, I think you can go ahead.
For me, it's not up yet. Probably will go up in a couple of days. Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech. Dave and I talked about him briefly on the previous show. He had gotten some good blocking grades from PFF, which had me a little intrigued. Not that that's to say all, but just as a starting point, because my perception of him was he was more that move tight end, but with good blocking grades. I wanted to see where that was coming from. He was really a stand up, basically a wide receiver at Texas Tech. He was at Arizona State for a bulk of his career, started out at Oklahoma. It's just a really unique body type. He's this squatty tight end, and he's 6'3", 263 is what he came in at this. Was he at the Senior Bowl? I think he was. One of the All-Star games. I can't quite remember which one he attended. Really good. Was he Senior Bowl or was he Shrine? Conyers from Texas Tech.
I think he was Shrine. Yeah, he was Shrine.
Okay. I'll have to ask one of the Shrine guys about him. He's athletic. He was a quarterback in high school, and then he moved to receiver because his family moved to a different high school that already had a quarterback, and that's kind of where the origin story came there. I mean, he's got some straight line ability. He's got a great contest. He's a power forward. He actually was a basketball star in high school. It was his first love. He had gotten basketball looks. Even in the transfer portal in his college career, there were some smaller basketball schools still trying to recruit him. So he's got this just like go up and get it. I mean, some of his highlight reel catches are really off the charts. He's got strong hands that can pluck away from his frame. He's got size. It's just kind of not sure what to do with the guy because he's not an inline guy. He barely worked out of a 3-point stance. There were some moments of him base blocking, but anytime he had to block in space in terms of pulling or trying to climb, it was a real struggle for him. He just really has not had a lot of hand in the ground type of experience. And he's not super dynamic as a receiver. He's just kind of a really funky guy overall. I comped him to Blake Bell from the Chiefs, who was a one-time Oklahoma quarterback that moved to tight end and had a decent NFL career. They even used Conyers as a wildcat quarterback at one point, especially at Arizona State. So just interesting guy, but just not quite sure where he's going to fit. Tommy Hill from Nebraska. He's a guy that I was excited about when I first started watching him. He had a good game against Travis Hunter in Colorado in 2024. He picked off Shedeur Sanders on a pick six in that game there, but he had a plantar fasciitis issue to close out the season, limited him to 7 games. He really struggled, tried to play through it. He had some really, really ugly tape because of it against Indiana, Illinois, USC. They shut him down. He's physical, he's athletic, but he's really raw. He's really underdeveloped. Technically, he's got some things to work on, but there's a lot of traits that are there with him. He's athletic. He can hit, can play the run. He's got great length, size. He's physical and press man, but it's just not a lot of body of work there with Tommy Hill. Trevor Etienne, the younger brother, Travis Etienne of the Jaguars, not as fast as his brother. He's a more quick than fast kind of guy. He runs tough, but it's not going to be a lot of power. He's a pretty undersized guy. A lot of medical concerns, some off-field concerns. He got arrested for DUI, was suspended for the first game of Georgia this year. I don't really see a draftable grade on him. Pat Bryant from Illinois is a guy I'm going to be lower on than a lot of people. I think some people view him as a potential top 10 receiver, maybe mid-round type of pick. He's got, downfield contestability. He's got, build-up speed, long strider. There's some yak with him. He'll grind out some tough yardage. But to me, Ross, he's one of those guys that can he separate? Can he, the lack of suddenness, the quickness in his routes, the underneath game, really didn't see that with Pat Bryant. And so while there is some tantalizing physical tools, if you're a big guy that can't separate and trying to win contested, unless you're at a George Pickens level, it's just a hard path for a lot of receivers to forge at the NFL. Seen a lot of college guys who were big and tall with a big catch radius, but couldn't separate, fail at the NFL level. I think about N'Keal Harry, Laquan Treadwell. And so I just wasn't a huge fan of Pat Bryant because of that. Jack Conley from Boston College, late, maybe day 3 interior lineman. It's actually got some interesting tackle eligible tight end value. He lined up there a lot in 2023, a bit in 2024. Played tackle, played guard. He's an interior guy, though, at the NFL level. He's a phone booth blocker that struggles on his edges in pass protection. And Jay Higgins from Iowa is an interesting guy, tackle machine, 170 tackles or so in 2023. He replaced Jack Campbell whenever Campbell graduated and went to where did he go? Detroit. He's got 4 interceptions. Higgins does. Captain, hearts and smarts all day for him, but undersized. Block shedding is inconsistent and gets swallowed up and engulfed. He's 5'11", 226, I think. And so I think special teams is going to be Higgins' ticket. Draftable guy, but late day 3. So not the most encouraging list of names I've been watching lately. Not exactly first round guys, but we want to have a healthy mix of top end talent and some later round guys to evaluate for the site.
Yeah, a lot of those guys you just mentioned were Senior Bowl guys. I know Tommy Hill, Pat Bryant, Connerly. Actually, I want to say, you know how they do those? They'll kind of at the end of some of the Senior Bowl practices, they'll pit certain guys against each other in one-on-ones with everybody watching and a big scrum. I think if my memory serves me correctly, I'm pretty sure they put Pat Bryant on Tommy Hill in one of those. And I think Bryant toasted him pretty good. There was some buzz about that. Tommy Hill overall didn't stand out to me in a big way, although he has those long arms. There's a couple of those guys down there. And so some intriguing traits, but yeah, what'd you have on Bryant? I think was he an undrafted grade for you?
I went pretty harsh. I even wrote in the report it's a harsh grade. I put undrafted on him, and he's a guy that I'm going to probably be a lot lower on than the consensus. I don't know what exactly that is right now. He'll get drafted, I think, but it's just like if you're a big guy that can't separate and you have to live at a winning contested at the college level, a lot of guys can do that because you're facing corners that largely won't play at the NFL level. If you're not going to be that guy at the NFL level that can get open, it's just hard. It's just not many guys have done that. Pickens is an outlier because he's just a freak of his own in that contested catch. It has to be like elite for me to believe in you. I don't think Bryant is quite there. Good kid, nothing against him. I just didn't see the suddenness, the quickness. He's a build-up speed guy. He's a downfield posts and go routes. Anything underneath is going to be more of a struggle for him. There were certainly some things to like about his game, so it's not like undrafted in the sense of there's no talent. But to me, if you have a fatal flaw at your position, which for me is separation at receiver, if you can't separate consistently, it's hard for me to buy in. And so that's why I gave that pretty harsh, admittedly undrafted grade on Pat Bryant.
Hey, fair enough. There's some of those guys last year. I think I was pretty low on like a Tez Walker, and he ended up going fairly high to the Ravens. So that happens.
Right. It just for me, because I love, Treadwell coming out. I remember, I'm trying to think back to some of the names. Kevin Hartman, I want to say, was one of them. N'Keal Harry. I don't know if I love N'Keal Harry, but like those were the guys that, you get burned on because they're big and they're physical, sure, but they just can't separate. And quarterback's never going to throw them the football because they just can't. Even George Pickens has had to develop his route running, and he's made strides there in terms of his nuance and being able to run a fuller route tree compared to where he was as a rookie. So it's not he's living and dying off the deep ball. He's not doing that as much as he used to. So that was just my thing on Brian. I mean, for Tommy Hill, he hadn't played football in a while, and not surprised to see him maybe have some struggles. Glad he was healthy enough to participate because I think it was a really bad foot injury he was dealing with. But it's just there's traits and tools, but he's a real like classic boom bust type of a guy. All right, Ross, any other thoughts here? Anything else you wanted to share? Any other late breaking? What quarterback is Pittsburgh going to not trade for today? Any rumors going around about that?
I think, there probably were 2 or 3 while we were on here, but
probably. All right. Looks like the Eagles are having their parade right now, so maybe Pittsburgh will have one of those someday. Ross, let me ask you this. Apparently an asteroid's going to hit Earth in 2032. Will Pittsburgh win a Super Bowl by then? I'm just kind of planning my parade versus asteroid preparation.
Ooh, 2032. I'm going to say no. So, yeah.
Asteroid first.
Pessimism. Yeah, asteroid first. Well, you did a terrible take the other day where you gave a specific year, I think. What did you say there?
2037 was my random made up guess. So yeah, it's post asteroid. So we'll see. The asteroid's probably not going to hit Earth, but don't take your science advice from me. And probably the same for Ross. All right, Ross, anything else here?
No, that is everything.
All right, no reader emails. I don't have the key to the email machine on me right now, so we'll do one of my world famous outros. Appreciate you guys listening, Ross, and thank you as well for filling in today. We appreciate that. We'll have Joe Clark on the show come Monday, so thank you again, Ross.
Yeah, thank you as always.
And be sure to check out Ross, of course, all of his content on the site, and the Depot Dive that comes out each Tuesday. Him and Joe Clark, a weekly show covering the Steelers week and the news about the team. So follow Ross on Twitter, and I don't have your handle up right now because I did not prepare this well, but follow Ross on Twitter at Ross_McCorkle. Follow myself on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Follow Dave in the site on Twitter at Steelers Depot. You can send us an email if you want to send an email, get your question asked and answered to theturbopodcast@gmail.com. You can donate, button up on the site. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.